They didn't see him coming. That was their first mistake. At exactly 7:48 a.m., the revolving doors of Langford and Ellis Global Headquarters spun open like a loaded chamber, and Isaiah Merrick stepped through. Tall, composed, a storm wrapped in charcoal wool. Outside, the morning mist still clung to the streets of downtown Chicago, softening the glass and steel skyline like a whisper before a scream. But inside, the air was sharp, chilled by ambition and citrus-scented polish. The lobby gleamed like a shrine to wealth. Black granite columns, brushed gold trim, and a marble floor that reflected every power heel and leather sole. It smelled of eucalyptus, ink, and old money. Phones buzzed in pockets, coffee steamed from stainless tumblers, eyes moved quickly, but never toward him. Isaiah walked like he didn't need permission. A 42-year-old man who had rebuilt companies others left for dead. Isaiah had no time for ceremony. His father used to say, "Son, they'll never invite you in. You build your own door." That door had brought him here. Today it wasn't just a meeting, it was a reckoning. In his left hand, he carried a weathered leather briefcase, his father's. In his eyes, decades of restraint. He wasn't wearing a name badge, he wasn't checking in at reception. And that, as it turned out, was their second mistake. Because in 12 minutes, Isaiah was scheduled to lead a confidential strategy session that could rescue or dismantle the very company whose employees were about to treat him like he didn't belong. But first, they'd try to ignore him. Then they'd try to stop him. And when that failed, they'd learn who Isaiah Merrick really was. Cue the silence before the storm. The polished marble floor of the Langford and Ellis lobby gleamed like ice under Isaiah's steps. But the welcome was colder. He approached the reception desk, a wide crescent of glass and stone beneath a chandelier that looked like frozen lightning. Behind it sat a woman in her late 30s, platinum blonde bun, square glasses catching the blue glow of her screen. Her nails clicked methodically against the keyboard like a metronome set to ignore. She didn't look up. Not once. Isaiah paused, calm but deliberate. "Good morning," he said, voice firm, clear. No response, not even a flinch. He leaned in a fraction closer, his presence undeniable. "I'm here for a 9 a.m. briefing, 37th floor." Still nothing. The only sign of life was the screen's reflection in her glasses and the slight tension in her jaw. Isaiah stood still for a beat, then turned slightly, enough to scan the room but not retreat. The silence wasn't just passive, it was curated, practiced, the kind that said you don't belong here without uttering a word. Then came the echo of slow, deliberate footsteps from behind. A figure emerged from the hallway, a security officer, mid-50s, stocky, pale, buzz-cut sharp as a blade. Ralph Kinley. His badge caught the overhead light like a warning. He didn't introduce himself, didn't ask why Isaiah was there. He just stopped 3 feet away and said, low and even, "Deliveries go around the back." Isaiah turned. The muscles in his jaw didn't move, but the temperature in his stare dropped several degrees. "I'm not here to deliver anything," he said. Kinley's eyes scanned him up and down. "This entrance is for corporate personnel only." Isaiah nodded slowly. "I'm aware." Kinley gestured toward the revolving doors. "Then you'll need to exit through the vendor access. Protocol." Isaiah didn't move. "Would you like to see my invitation?" he asked, already reaching for his phone. Kinley didn't respond. His hand hovered near the radio clipped to his belt. A silent threat, not overt, but clear. Escalation is an option. Isaiah's fingers curled around the briefcase handle, the same one his father had carried into meetings where no one expected him to speak, let alone lead. But Isaiah had no interest in proving anything, not to people who'd already decided who he was before he opened his mouth. Instead, he took a step back and turned, but not toward the exit. Toward the seating area near the wall, the one everybody knew was code for "vendors wait here." He didn't sit, didn't slump. He stood there, watch ticking softly on his wrist, as the lobby pulsed around him with quiet dismissal. At 8:49, he checked the time again, 11 minutes until a meeting that would define the next fiscal year. A meeting he wasn't just attending, he was leading. And no one here had a clue. But they would. because the man they'd just tried to erase from the lobby was about to rewrite the rules of the room, and they were still playing checkers. Isaiah. He brought the chessboard. The elevator chimed, a soft ding that cut through the ambient lobby noise like a blade. Isaiah turned toward it just as three young men in slim-cut suits rounded the corner, laughing too loudly for the hour. Lanyards swung around their necks like status medals. One held a coffee cup with boss mode scribbled in marker. They stopped abruptly at the sight of him. One of them, tall ginger hair slicked back, the smugness of a trust fund etched across his face, smirked. He leaned in toward his friends and said, just loud enough to carry, "Did someone order a courier?" The others snickered. The sound was sharp. Casual cruelty dressed in business, casual. Isaiah didn't react. He met the man's gaze with the calm of someone who'd weathered far worse storms. That only made the guy bolder. "You lost, man?" the ginger asked, stepping closer, faux concern coating his voice. "This floor's for senior management. Kitchen staff uses the service lift." Isaiah's voice was even, measured. "I know exactly where I'm going. Do you?" The ginger blinked. Not used to pushback, not used to being questioned, especially not by someone like Isaiah. But before the moment could tighten, another presence entered the frame like a hammer falling mid-scene. Kyle Brenner, mid to late 30s, director of strategy, grey pinstripe suit, polished shoes that clicked with confidence. The kind of man who'd built a career not on brilliance, but on being in the right rooms with the right people and knowing exactly who didn't belong in them. He eyed Isaiah with a flash of confusion, then something colder. "Can I help you with something?" Kyle asked, his tone clipped. Not curious, challenging. Isaiah remained still. "Isaiah Merrick, I'm here for the 9 a.m. executive briefing." Kyle's brow lifted, disbelief flickering across his face before settling into condescension. He gave Isaiah the kind of once-over usually reserved for suspicious packages. "And who invited you?" Kyle asked. "Was there some open house I wasn't told about?" Behind him, one of the younger men chuckled. "I was invited by Loretta Voss's office," Isaiah replied, steady. "I'm consulting on the Triarch acquisition." Kyle laughed once, short, sharp. "Right," he said, dragging the word. "We don't bring in consultants for internal briefings, especially not without my sign-off." He waved a dismissive hand. "If you're here about facilities or IT vendor stuff, second floor's where you want to be." "I'm not with facilities," Isaiah said, voice gaining an edge, "and I'm not a vendor." "You sure?" Kyle snapped, stepping closer. "Because I've run these sessions for 5 years, and we don't exactly outsource the thinking part." The implication hung there, ugly, unmistakable. Isaiah didn't blink. "You might want to check with your chief strategy officer before making assumptions." Kyle sneered. "I am the chief strategy officer." The laughter from the others came freer now, emboldened. One of them leaned toward Kyle and whispered, "Maybe he's shadowing someone. Internship or something?" Kyle nodded with mock understanding. "Makes more sense." He turned back to Isaiah, smile stretching. "But unfortunately, we don't run internship programs through the executive elevator. Company policy." Isaiah's eyes sharpened, his breath slow, steady. He'd seen it before, this dance of polished insult wrapped in policy. But this time, they had no idea what game they were playing, and they were running out of moves. The elevator lights above flickered green just as Kyle was preparing to deliver another polished insult. But the words never left his lips. From the side corridor, heels tapped rapidly against the tile, then came a voice, clear, breathless, and slicing through the tension like sunlight through a storm cloud. "Mr. Merrick." All eyes turned. Nina Caldwell, early 30s, crisp navy blazer, tablet in hand, approached at a near sprint. Her badge read, "Executive Operations." Her presence was confident, but the flash of panic in her eyes said everything. She knew he'd been held up. "I'm so sorry," she said, stepping between Isaiah and the wall of smug grins. "We've been waiting for you upstairs. Conference room A, 37th floor. The board's ready." Silence swept the lobby like a falling curtain. The ginger kid's coffee cup tilted slightly in his hand. Kyle's jaw didn't drop, but it set, hard, like he'd just swallowed a shard of glass. The other two stepped back instinctively, their bravado evaporating like steam. Isaiah didn't gloat, he didn't even glance their way. He nodded once to Nina. "Lead the way." Kyle stepped forward, trying to recover. "Hold on, he's going up to the executive level?" Nina turned, her voice clipped but polite. "Yes, he's the lead consultant on the Triarch deal, appointed directly through Ms. Voss's acquisition directive, board-level oversight." Board level? Kyle's mouth twitched, like the words had physically stung him. Behind Isaiah, the receptionist, who had yet to acknowledge his existence, finally looked up. For the first time, her eyes tracked him fully. But she said nothing. Too late. Isaiah walked past them all with a calmness that felt almost surgical. As the elevator doors opened with a smooth hiss, Nina stepped inside first, but Isaiah paused. He turned just slightly toward Kyle, their eyes locked. Isaiah's voice was low, controlled. "It's always fascinating," he said, "how fast people show you who they really are, when they think you're no one." Kyle didn't respond. His face, once smug and flushed with condescension, now looked blank. But it was more than that. There was fear hiding under the marble expression, the fear of something slipping beyond his control. The elevator swallowed Isaiah whole, doors closing with a sound too quiet to carry the weight it left behind. Back in the lobby, no one spoke. The three junior execs scattered in different directions, suddenly needing to be anywhere else. The receptionist quietly turned back to her screen. Kyle remained still, staring at the elevator, the ghost of Isaiah's words still etched in the air. "If anyone asks," he muttered toward the desk, his voice bitter, "he got in through some board directive. Nobody here approved it." But even as the words left his mouth, he knew he wasn't talking to her. He was trying to convince himself, and he was failing. Because somewhere in the back of his mind, something twisted. A realization that maybe, just maybe, he had just humiliated someone who had the power to write his name into irrelevance. And worse, he'd done it with a smile. 37th floor. The elevator doors opened to a corridor lined with dark walnut paneling and soft recessed lights that hummed overhead like tension. Isaiah stepped out behind Nina, the soles of his shoes whispering across imported hardwood. At the far end, conference room A loomed, glass walls, a polished stone table, and shadows of executives already seated inside. The door didn't open for him. Nina paused outside. "They're just finishing the opening remarks," she said with a quiet, professional smile. "We'll bring you in right after." Isaiah nodded. Through the glass he could see them. Board members, senior staff, department heads. Some scanning tablets, others stirring espresso with tiny silver spoons. At the head of the table, flanked by a projection screen glowing with quarterly charts and merger slides, sat Kyle Brenner. He looked like he belonged. Relaxed, comfortable. The man who just tried to humiliate him was now leading a conversation about a deal Isaiah had been brought in to oversee. He watched Kyle chuckle at something someone said. Watched him lean back like the room was his kingdom. He hadn't introduced Isaiah. Hadn't acknowledged him. He didn't need to. Because he hadn't expected Isaiah to ever make it this far. The click of a second elevator door pulled Isaiah's attention. From it stepped the intern, young, white, early 20s, cheap polyester blazer, messenger bag slung across one shoulder. He looked confused but enthusiastic. And no one questioned him. No one stopped him. A woman from marketing smiled and gestured toward a seat. "Greg brought him in this morning," someone whispered. "One of the new interns, smart kid." Isaiah narrowed his eyes. No vetting, no ID check, just a warm smile and a seat at the table. The same table he, the lead strategist on a multi-million-dollar acquisition, was still waiting outside of. That's when it happened. Kyle leaned toward his assistant, Lana, late 30s, smart and sharp, but not yet battle-tested. He whispered something with the same grin he'd worn earlier downstairs. And though he didn't know Isaiah could see his lips move behind the glass, he spoke with the arrogance of someone who believed he never had to look over his shoulder. "These people," Kyle muttered, "really think wearing a tailored suit and carrying a briefcase makes them one of us. It's almost cute." Lana froze, her pen stilled. She glanced toward the glass, toward Isaiah, who stood there watching, face unreadable. But inside, Rage wasn't the right word. It was quieter than that. It was clarity. The door opened at last. "Mr. Merrick," a staff associate said, stepping halfway out. "They're ready for you now." Isaiah adjusted his cuffs and walked forward, each step silent, deliberate. The murmur in the room softened as he entered. Some looked up with curiosity. Others barely reacted. Kyle didn't stand, didn't speak. "We were just discussing market volatility projections," he said to the room, not to Isaiah. "Hopefully our guest can catch up." Isaiah didn't blink. He stepped forward, opened his briefcase, and pulled out a single sheet of thick, official stock. An invitation, signed and sealed by Loretta Voss, former CEO, approved by the board. He placed it in front of Kyle. Kyle glanced at it, then slowly picked it up, and without warning, tore it in half. Gasps, not loud, but sharp. The pieces fluttered to the table like ash. "I don't care who signed this," Kyle said, eyes hard. "This is my floor, my meeting, and I decide who gets a seat at the table." For a long moment, Isaiah said nothing. Then he bent down, collected the torn halves, folded them with surgical care, and slid them back into his briefcase. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for confirming exactly what kind of culture this company has allowed to fester." And with that, Isaiah turned and walked out. He didn't slam the door. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. Because the reckoning had already begun, and the next time he walked through that door, it wouldn't be as a guest. It would be as the one in charge. The door had barely closed behind Isaiah when the air inside conference room A thickened with unease. No one spoke. Some exchanged glances. Others stared hard at the glowing charts on the screen, pretending not to hear the weight of what had just happened. Kyle remained standing at the head of the table, straightening his cuffs with a forced composure, his face frozen in what might have passed for confidence, if not for the subtle twitch in his jaw. He turned to the room, trying to recover the rhythm. "Let's move on," he said quickly. "Triarch merger language, Q3 projections. Let's stay on track." But before anyone could respond, there was a soft knock. The door opened, not cautiously, but cleanly. Every head turned. Standing in the doorway, backlit by the recessed lights of the executive hallway, was Eleanor Blackwood. The name alone made people sit straighter. Chairwoman of Orion Equity Holdings, the global investment board that had quietly funneled over $10 million into Langford Ellis just weeks prior, preventing an internal collapse no one at the table dared speak of. She was dressed in graphite grey, hair sharp as her eyes, presence calm as a loaded trigger. And beside her, Isaiah Merrick, no longer waiting behind glass, no longer needing introduction. He walked in beside Eleanor, not behind her, with the measured grace of someone who had never left. Eleanor's heels clicked softly against the floor as she made her way to the head of the table. She stopped just short of Kyle. "Good morning," she said, voice crisp but unhurried. "I hope we're not interrupting." Kyle tried to speak, his lips parting in a practiced smile. "Chairwoman Blackwood, we weren't expecting—" She raised a single hand. "I'm sure you weren't." The room fell silent. Eleanor turned slightly, gesturing toward Isaiah. "Allow me to properly introduce Mr. Isaiah Merrick. Some of you may not yet be familiar with his role. He has just been appointed interim CEO of Langford Ellis, effective immediately." No one moved. Isaiah stood tall beside her, eyes calm but cutting, a live wire beneath still water. "He is not only leading the Triarch acquisition," Eleanor continued, "but overseeing a full executive audit and strategic restructuring of senior operations. This board has already been briefed. His authority is board-backed and binding." Kyle's face drained of color. He stammered, "There must be some kind of miscommunication. He didn't announce." Isaiah stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You spoke a lot earlier," he said, tone precise, "about who belongs in this room, about who deserves a seat at the table." Kyle forced a chuckle. "Mr. Merrick, I think there's been a huge misunderstanding." "There's no misunderstanding," Isaiah said, cutting in. "You were very clear. The only thing you didn't know was who I am." He opened his briefcase once more, laid a sleek black folder flat on the table, and flipped it open. Inside, the finalized investment agreement, signed and sealed, granting him full oversight of all strategic decisions. personnel included. Kyle stared at the pages, then at Isaiah, then at the door he'd torn open with arrogance just moments before. He realized, too late, that the man he tried to erase was now writing the next chapter. And Kyle? He was already a footnote. Silence had never sounded so loud. Kyle stood stiffly at the far end of the table, eyes fixed on the open folder in front of him. The evidence, the authority, the irreversible truth. He didn't speak. He couldn't. The room around him had shifted. The air felt colder now, heavier, as though the walls themselves understood what had just occurred. Isaiah closed the folder with quiet finality and turned to face the room. "Let's be clear," he said, voice firm but even. "What just happened wasn't a personal mistake. It was a symptom of a deeper disease." The boardroom remained frozen. "This isn't about who got invited," he continued. "It's about the culture that questions value based on assumptions, while protecting arrogance under the label of leadership." A few executives shifted in their chairs, some glancing toward Kyle, others avoiding eye contact altogether. Even Victor Halpin, senior VP of operations, now leaned back with crossed arms, expression unreadable, but his silence louder than any rebuke. Isaiah stepped to the projection screen. With a single tap on the remote, the slick branding and earnings forecasts disappeared, replaced by a new interface, a dashboard of internal audits, names, charts, flags, each tied to anonymous employee reports, complaint patterns, exit interview data, and behavior indices. A bar chart dominated the top corner. At the very top, Kyle Brenner, toxic leadership risk, high. Gasps whispered through the room, but no one dared speak. "These reports were collected over 3 months," Isaiah said, "long before I ever walked into this lobby. I didn't come here to guess. I came with facts." He pointed toward the lower section. There, listed beneath staff behavior reviews, were the names of the receptionist, security officer, and the 3 junior employees from the elevator, each tied to formal complaints of bias, microaggressions, and procedural violations that had previously been dismissed, or worse, informally resolved. "This company had a choice," Isaiah said, turning back to the room, "to protect the system or to protect its people. From today forward, only one of those options remains." A heavy pause followed. Then came the voice of power. Eleanor Blackwood stood. "Effective immediately," she declared, "Mr. Kyle Brenner is suspended from all duties pending a full ethics and governance review. His access to internal systems is being revoked as we speak." Kyle flinched as if struck. "Wait, what?" he stammered, voice breaking for the first time. "You can't be serious." But she was already turning to internal compliance, a quiet man seated near the door. He nodded once, stood, and approached Kyle. "You'll be escorted off the floor," the compliance officer said softly. "Please gather your belongings." Kyle looked around the room, desperately searching for an ally. No one met his gaze. Not Victor, not Lana, not even the intern. His mouth opened, but no words came. His body slumped, like air escaping from a man who'd been floating too high for too long. The security alert flashed on the corner monitor. Access revoked, and just like that, the man who ran the room was gone. Isaiah turned back to the team. "For those of you who remained silent while this culture festered, let me be clear, complicity is not a neutral act. From now on, accountability won't be optional." There was no applause, just understanding. A page had turned, and a new chapter had already begun. In the weeks that followed, the building remained the same, its sharp glass angles still glittering against the Chicago skyline, its lobby still echoing with polished shoes and half-finished conversations. But inside, something had shifted, something fundamental. Langford Ellis was no longer just a company, it was a case study in rebirth. Isaiah Merrick, now fully seated as interim CEO, didn't rule from behind a glass office. He walked the halls. He dropped into team meetings unannounced. He asked hard questions and listened to uncomfortable truths. The fear that once pulsed beneath the surface of every staff interaction was slowly replaced by something else. Respect. Earned, not demanded. The receptionist and security guard who dismissed him, gone. The 3 junior execs who laughed at him in the lobby, still here. but they were required to complete a 6-week intensive on workplace equity, followed by peer-reviewed mentorship sessions. Not for punishment, for perspective. Change wasn't cosmetic, it was systemic. Promotion criteria were rewritten. Leadership evaluations now included anonymous employee feedback, not just quarterly numbers. Those once dismissed as not the right fit were re-examined, and in many cases elevated. People who had spent years hiding their ideas out of fear of being labeled too bold, too different, or too junior were now invited to speak and rewarded when they did. And Kyle Brenner, he never returned to Langford Ellis. But Isaiah didn't destroy him. He didn't smear his name or turn his downfall into a corporate spectacle. Instead, when the ethics panel finalized their review, Isaiah offered Kyle something unexpected. A choice. Resign with dignity or face a public termination. Kyle resigned. Months later, rumors surfaced that he had quietly begun volunteering with a youth leadership program in Milwaukee. No press, no PR push, just a man trying to find his footing again, somewhere far from the spotlight he once craved. When asked why he'd handled it that way, Isaiah said simply, "Accountability isn't about humiliation. It's about giving people a door to walk through after they've faced the mirror." One afternoon, a staff member found a sticky note on the bulletin board outside Isaiah's office. It read, "I used to think being invisible was the price of survival. Now I believe visibility is the path to change." Isaiah never asked who wrote it. He didn't need to. Because the culture was speaking back now, not just in meetings and policies, but in hallway glances, in second chances offered, in ideas finally given the room to breathe. He stood one evening by the corner window of the executive floor, watching the city buzz beneath him. This city where he'd once been denied opportunity, now lit with possibility. The same streets where his father once carried rejection letters in a cracked leather briefcase. The same briefcase Isaiah now used to carry the contracts that saved this company. Respect isn't owed based on appearance. It's earned through how we lead when no one's watching, and how we respond when everyone finally is. Isaiah didn't just change a company, he changed a conversation. And in doing so, he left behind something rarer than power. A culture that remembers, a legacy that listens, and a blueprint for what happens when the overlooked finally take their rightful place. At the head of the table, sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one no one sees coming. Isaiah Merrick's journey wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about proving what was possible. When dignity refuses to bow, and leadership is redefined not by ego, but by empathy, clarity, and conviction. What happened at Langford Ellis wasn't just a shift in hierarchy, it was a revelation. A reminder that greatness doesn't always arrive with applause or headlines. Sometimes it walks in quietly, gets ignored at the front desk, and still ends up rewriting the rules. We live in a world that too often equates visibility with value, title with talent, background with potential. But real leadership challenges that narrative. Real leadership asks, what do you do when the system overlooks someone? Do you join it, or do you change it? Isaiah chose the latter, and in doing so, he taught everyone watching, inside that boardroom and far beyond it, that silence in the face of injustice is never neutral. That culture is built, moment by moment, decision by decision, and each of us is either upholding something toxic or daring to replace it with something better. He reminded us that it's not enough to open doors for ourselves. We must hold them open for others, especially those who have been taught they don't even belong in the building. Because legacy isn't built on dominance, it's built on the courage to listen, to change, to lead without needing the spotlight, and to do the right thing even when no one is watching. If there's one takeaway from Isaiah's story, it's this. The room only changes when someone refuses to play by the rules that never served them. So whether you're standing outside the boardroom or already seated at the table, ask yourself, are you echoing the past, or are you building the future? Isaiah Merrick didn't just walk into a meeting that morning. He walked into history and left the door open behind him. And for every person who's ever been underestimated, overlooked, or shut out, that door is still open. And it's waiting for you. If this story moved you, challenged your thinking, or reminded you of someone who's had to fight twice as hard just to be seen, Don't let it stop here. Share it, talk about it, and most importantly, live it. Because the next Isaiah Merrick might be watching right now, waiting for a sign that their voice matters, that their presence belongs, that their path is possible. At X Daily Stories, we're not just telling stories, we're changing the narrative. So if you believe in powerful truths, in second chances, in justice served with grace, hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join a community that sees everyone. Drop a comment below. What part hit you the hardest? Was it the silent standoff in the lobby, the public reckoning in the boardroom, or the quiet redemption that came after? We want to hear from you, because stories like these, they don't just entertain, they awaken. And we're just getting started.